My name is Gary. I'm your host at Mindset Growth Podcast. Want to welcome you back to another episode. I'm excited for our next guest. Got to know him through an industry I was involved in some years back and still connected to this day. One of the things that has inspired me to have him on our podcast today is the fact that he's just a young person, or was a young person when I met him, and came into this industry of insurance that most people get involved in by default in some form or another. Family owns it, or maybe there's a friendship or something like that actually brings them in. One thing that I would like to talk about a little bit as well today is the unfortunate circumstances in which he came into the industry. So with no further ado, I am going to introduce you to Courtney Wooge.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. You're absolutely right. Nobody has on their guidance counselor list in high school to get into insurance. Most people view that like used car salesmen, that they vow not to do that.
Right.
But my story is that, my father founded this agency that I now own and operate back in 1978, and got my teeth cut serving ice cream to RVers when I was 8 years old, and trying to collect data right before data was big data, just collect their names and phone numbers. And so when I left for college, Luther College in Decorah, at that time I vowed I'm not going to get into insurance. Got my degree in MIS, which is Management Information Systems. And, this will shed some light on my age. I went there in 1998 into college. And at that time, everybody was technology, Y2K, right? The world's going to end. And if we don't figure out how these computers are going to switch over and die, software engineering was where all the money was.
Right.
And like a lot of business people, I am kind of coin operated. So I thought, making some money in my life, it might be a good thing.
Right.
So got my degree, went to work for a small company in Des Moines called Principal Financial Group in their IT arena. Shifted over to Rockwell Collins, another small Iowa company in Cedar Rapids, made the move over there. And at that time is when my father said, look, I've had some medical issues and I've got to do something with the business. So he just encouraged me to get my license while I was, single and didn't have many things going on the weekends, right?
Right.
Now that we have kids and things, your weekends get taken care of, but just encouraged me to get my license. And from there, his diagnosis of colon cancer was stage 4, and he knew that he needed to do something. So that's where it was like, now or never. Either I
Right.
look at the valuation and do it, or I just continue on with my life here in Cedar Rapids. So that was when I started to take a harder look, and started to have kids and raise a family at that time. So it kind of made all the sense in the world to move back to a smaller community. I am located in Forest City, Iowa, where the headquarters for Winnebago Industries is at.
Right.
Which was the nature of our insurance agency, was primarily RV insurance.
Okay.
So from there, got my teeth cut, I guess, on looking at financials and jumping off the cliff on borrowing money and going to banks and attorneys and all these fun things, and did end up purchasing the business in 2012.
Did you have aspirations we have a lot of small business owners that listen to this. So was that always your aspiration to own your own business?
Great question. It always was. Yes. Okay. I had did, the MLM, multi-level marketing stuff in Cedar Rapids, got into Amway, and there was a quick something. I made t-shirts. I've always had like these little sole proprietor things that I always did on the side. So making the money based on your effort had always appealed to me.
Okay. Well, some people don't really don't really ever aspire to do that, and just family business and other things kind of draw them into it. In your case, that was clearly different, but
Yeah.
it's and you now have some kids and they're college or older.
They are, yeah, and that's Gary. If you remember how I met you, both of our kids were launching off in the
Yes,
Army down in where was it, north of Des Moines.
right.
So yeah, three boys that are now out of the house, two in college, one's graduating. The one in the military finally, did his 4.5 years, and he's now in the working world. And then we just have one at home, an 11-year-old girl still at
Okay.
home.
Awesome. What one question that I like to ask everybody, because I think this is interesting to hear what people that are successful, how they manage their day. Do you have a morning routine?
100%. I'm glad you asked because it is. I saw a movie one time where I forget the name of it, but coffee is for closers, and
Okay.
I forget what movie it is, but it's about a sales team, and the sales manager says everybody get a cup of coffee because if you drink coffee, coffee is for closers to close deals.
So you've drank
So
coffee since then.
yes, every morning my routine is get up and make the cup of coffee and just sit and enjoy the first half a cup to get your thoughts going for how you're going to grow and proceed through the day.
Okay. And then from there you kick off, get into the routine of the day.
Exactly. Yeah, I'd say that's it. Do you find that in a lot of your people that listen or you have on that they're coffee drinkers?
They have morning routines, and I would say a lot of them drink coffee, but everybody pretty much has a morning routine of some type. And typically it involves meditation of some form or
Mm-hmm.
working out. I mean, there's always seems to be those, and it depends on their age, sometimes
Yeah.
what their health conditions are to what
Right.
that dictates that.
Well, that's, I guess, my form of meditation is just sitting that first half a cup, just kind of sitting there with nothing other than the morning sunshine, right?
Right,
It's that calm before you you
right.
you get into things.
I think it's, and I do the same thing. I always try to take, if I can, at least 10 minutes but often it can be longer in the morning. But if you can just kind of process where your day's at, what you want to accomplish and focus on,
Hmm.
it seems it brings the urgency or the chaos of the day together a little better. But
No doubt.
we have that you did not get this, but I have what we call rapid fire questions that we like to ask you. It's just so the audience gets to know you better.
Hmm.
So I'm going to fire a couple of these at you. They're not, don't need to overthink them, just answer them. Do you have a bucket list?
Half a bucket. It's not a full bucket. Half a bucket.
Okay. You've already
It's not. It's not.
accomplished half of it.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
But it keeps getting bigger every year. I keep adding. The bucket keeps getting growing larger.
There you go. So do you prefer summer or winter Olympics?
Winter.
Okay. Downhill skiing.
Yeah, living in the north here, snowmobiling and
Oh,
skiing,
yeah.
and it's just different than all my friends in the south. They have no idea what winter sports are.
Right.
Everybody knows what summer sports are. Nobody
Right.
knows what winter sports are down south.
I feel like Iowa is in that bubble where it cycles. We'll go through years of
Hmm.
having plenty of snow and we all buy our snowmobiles. And then a couple of years later, we're all trying to sell them again. So
Right.
it's always fluctuating. Um,
Yep.
if you could have a conversation with anybody from the past or the present, who would it be?
Boy, I mean, the natural is, certainly my father, right?
Right.
He's now deceased, but I would probably, the figure that everybody recognizes is Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
That would probably be one, just because I've read a lot of stuff about him, and yeah, he would be the one.
That's his name comes up, I would say, when that question gets asked at least half the time.
No kidding.
Yeah. I think
Wow.
he's just was such an impactful person in our culture. And
Mm-hmm.
that would be my pick as well.
I'll be darned.
So let's switch gears a little bit. You had mentioned you went to school there, I'm assuming you did, did you go anywhere? I mean, when you went to college, did you go back to Iowa or anything, or you just,
So when I graduated from Luther and went to Principal, at the time in early 2000s, they were off. Principal Financial Group was a public company. They were offering anybody that wanted to go back to get your post-secondary degree, and they would pay for 100% of it.
hmm,
So I went back and started getting my MBA through the University of Iowa in their MBA PM program,
okay,
nights and weekends, etc. And in the middle of obtaining that, that's when I got the job at Rockwell Collins, and they had the same program. Those things don't exist these days, where big companies pay for your MBA or any post
right.
secondary at because I was just a junior engineer or whatever at Principal and Rockwell Collins, and I was able to get 100% of my MBA paid for by both of those Iowa companies.
Really? That's
Yep.
incredible. Yeah, I'm starting to see, I don't know if you see this with clients you work with in the insurance business, but I see a lot of people in the trades that are starting to pay for, 2-year trade schools to kids coming out of high school. Just, they've got to stay on for 2 years, but they're paying for it.
Yes, yes, and I'm seeing that as well in my general contracting buddies. In order to compete for that talent and to get people in the trades, that's sort of the carrot.
Yeah,
But it was so strange that when I left Rockwell, that their rule at the time was you didn't have to commit any time after they've paid for it. Like minute the check cleared on your last tuition payment, there was no tie to keep you there. Which I, as a business owner now, is unheard of.
right, right.
Um, I
Usually
think
they want
they've
a
probably
commitment.
changed their methodology a little bit there because they're training people like me to get their MBA, and they're like, oh, I want to get into business and do something else.
So you went to school to be an engineer,
Hmm.
and you mentioned at 8 years old, you were already collecting data.
Hmm.
So now that you're in insurance, isn't it interesting how much of that drives everything you do really comes back to data? And just talk a little bit about how those two things overlap.
Well, I think that's why this agency has kind of taken off since I purchased it, because I've had that tech and data background before tech and data was cool. So they intersect more than what I think. So Progressive Insurance was the leader in that. If you've ever been to Cleveland, they have like 3 or 4 floors of just data centers where they're constantly data mining to set the premium based on the risk.
Right,
So correlate that to my agency. Our management system was key to us in using our data and expiration dates on folks that we got an opportunity to quote but we did not sell, or folks that have canceled with us, and then after a year we follow up with them. And setting those processes and those marketing cadences are critical, I think, to grow any business. If you've got the data, you don't
right,
have to pay for it anymore.
right.
You just simply plug that in to pick your favorite tool, your Salesforce tools or whatever technology you want to plug it into, and use that data to your advantage.
The thing that's interesting, you've not really had a sales background. It was more or less
Hmm.
data driven. But I think you made a comment earlier about most self-employed people or business owners are coin operated. So it's amazing what type of sales a person can do when there's motivation there.
Hmm.
I'm sure early on when you had payments coming due, it was not that difficult to go out and close another deal and feel really good about it.
Yep.
However, when you're driving all that data, the thing that's baffling to me is how companies invest, and this isn't just insurance, because in insurance we deal with construction and all automotive and you name it, every other little business out there, small business owner.
Hmm.
It's amazing to me how many people spend a lot of money and work really hard to bring in clients or potential clients, and they don't utilize the information or the relationships they already have. Do you see that happen as well?
I absolutely do. And that is one mindset that I have said, let's try and drive our cost of acquisition down somehow. So once you have that as your North Star of we got to get, you know, to spend $500 to just acquire something in the insurance space is, unless you're going after big fish, it just simply doesn't work.
Right.
So I see that as a major hurdle to folks, that they think they have to spend all kinds of money and go to these big conferences and do all those things. And some of that stuff is fine, but you can get upside down in a hurry
Right.
if you're just spinning your wheels.
Right.
Versus if you had the data, or you could pay for some data. Some of the data laws are also changing, so you got to be wary of that, right?
Right.
But there are, find the right partners and find the right staff to manage the data.
Right. Well, and it just comes back to, you mentioned Salesforce. There's a tremendous amount of CRMs out there. There's a lot of industry specific CRMs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazed at how many times, though, they don't even stay in touch with the client once the project's finished. There's no communication, and the client forgets who they hired, and now they're, looking for somebody 2, 3 years later and trying to figure out who to use again. Uh, it's amazing what that relationship building piece, I think, can benefit somebody.
Well, absolutely. Those systems, you can never figure them all out when you first start, right? You just
Right.
get the basics. And if you never peel back that onion, you're just buying a Corvette and only driving it backwards.
Right. I like that.
So yeah, I mean, if you can't figure it out as the leader, hire somebody to go figure that out.
Right. No, systems and processes. I just wanted to touch on that because that was one thing I
Hmm.
knew from the beginning when you got into the agency, that you really were driven to maintain those relationships. Uh, you also had a unique situation where you worked with so many people in different states because of the Winnebago factory and the
Yep.
connections to the RV industry. So I just want folks listening to this to think about, what is it that you've already got in front of you that you could work with to drive that clientele right back to you as a repeat customer over and over. And even if they didn't buy the first time, stay in touch. There's so many ways to communicate.
Well, there is, and that has helped drive down our cost of acquisition, because if we have a no sale, that's fine. It actually is a sale to me because we've collected the data,
Right.
and now we have the opportunity. Cool thing in the insurance world, every year is a different year,
Right.
and those are only 1 year contracts
Right.
typically, unless it's a 6 month auto. And we're always going to have an opportunity, if we have a valid email address and a valid phone number and a valid name, we're always going to try to reach back out to that person.
Right.
And if it's still no, that's fine. We'll keep
Right.
moving on.
No,
But
it's just a point I wanted to drive into a little bit. I know we talked about what brought you back into insurance with your dad's health condition and all of that. What was the time frame, and just talk a little bit about how that went down, because you were not in the business long till he basically was out of the business. Is that correct?
yeah, that is correct. So day one, so after I got my license and after we agreed to the valuation, we're of the opinion, my father and I were, that nothing is ever given, it is earned. Even though it was a family transaction, um, I had to go to the bank and borrow the money and do all those things, which helped, right? If you're given something, we know from raising our own kids, if you give them something, they don't treat it as much as if they earned it or paid for it themselves.
Right.
So we actually set up a process where I was going to acquire it over 5 years.
Okay.
So day one, before I even started my first paycheck, I had, and my wife looked at me like, "We're going to do what?" Right? We had just built a house in Cedar Rapids. We sold that, took all that equity. We had a nice boat. We'd go down to Coralville Lake and boat around with the kids. Sold that, sold all of our toys, moved up to Forest City in a house that was half the size and rented, and basically parlayed all of the cash that we had as a down payment for our first 20% into the business.
Right.
So that day one, we had to announce to the staff that, hey, Courtney's now an owner, and he hasn't even sold a policy yet. And it really shifted my mindset on there's two ways to think about this as a business owner. You can work on your business or in your business.
Okay.
And you have to do both when you're new. So working on my business was the financials and being an owner
Right.
and kind of guiding it. Working in the business was then selling policies.
Right.
So I would spend my days trying to sell policies and get deals together, and then my nights and weekends when I had time to then focus on right the loan payments. How am I going to acquire the other 20% the next year? You know, staffing, looking at all those things long term. So I hope I'm answering your question. It was
Yes.
a 5-year plan. After 3 years, it became clear that my father, once I got to 60% after 3 years, he just said, "You're now majority owner. Can you get the other 40% this year?" And I said, "Well, we've been growing the agency," and um, just went to the banker and said, "Yeah, you've been growing it." So I actually did that in 3 years rather than the 5 that we had planned on.
Oh, wow. You hit on
Um,
2 points there that were very, that have to happen in every business. And this is the piece that I see most people get mixed up on a little, and that is working in the business and on the business.
mhm.
And most folks end up working in the business, especially if they start one or buy one, because they want to put all this time in to make it happen, but they don't take time to focus on any of the data, figure out where the financials are at, and do any like goal setting and projections and things like that. What got you to have that balance in the beginning? Was it just things you learned through school, from working at other companies? What helped you sort that out?
Yeah, great question. I think the history of it is certainly the schooling. That MBA really got me to know what a balance sheet was, an income statement,
Right,
projections, cash flow statement, how to grow, what EBITDA is,
right,
what top line revenue is, managing your expenses, ROI, all of these business acronyms and buzz terms, I think really got me to understand that. And then at the end of the day, my father saying, "Don't forget, you got to come up with a plan and set some goals if this is going to be successful." So him kind of still chirping in my ear, right? I want to go off and fish for the rest of my life. So don't forget about the long run here. So it was kind
right.
of a combination of I had the tools, I just didn't know how to use them.
So he kind of helped structure that for you some, though?
Yeah, he just would tell me, right? We'd have breakfast in the early years 2 or 3 times a week. Speaking of the morning routine, I'd
Right,
meet him for breakfast at 7 a.m. and he would just say, "What questions do you have?" And I just rapid fire, this
right,
member is doing that, sort of in your business stuff. And then at the end, he would say, "Don't forget about where you want to be in a year." Right? What are you doing today to mitigate right what you're going to need in 6 months or a year? And did you see that expense of IT expense and how it's getting quite high? And right, just kind of giving me little clues. And then he would just leave, right? He wouldn't try to micromanage me, which I thought was a great trait he had.
right,
And I guess it was forced too because he didn't want to work anymore, right? You have
right,
to be ready to give up and say,
right,
"Look, I'm going to go fishing."
right. That's
So
very interesting that you had that time with him and could build that relationship and how he could help guide that. I think a lot of folks, if they're listening to this, you got to have both of those aspects down.
100%, you have to focus on both of them. Otherwise, the wheel's going to get a little square and it's not
Yeah.
gonna it's not gonna roll down the hill.
And at some point, you're going to shift more into, what the focus, working on the business rather than in the business. That clearly happens as it grows, and it should with time
Yeah,
if it's healthy and growing.
and that's where I'm at today. It's 80 to 85% on the business because I've jumped into more acquisition mode and um, did a deal where I became a seller and an owner of the new holding company. So part of my responsibilities now is to look more big picture and go out and acquire other agencies that fit our partnership model.
Separately, I'm Gage.
And I'm Bontrager.
Together, we are Gage Bontrager Consulting.
We work on changing your mindset,
Developing leaders,
building systems and processes
helping you grow personally and professionally
to achieve the success that you want personally and professionally.
however you choose to define success for you.
Reach out to us and follow us on social media or look us up on the website, and that will put you on a path to achieve what is missing in your life.
Thanks for watching this episode of Mindset Growth Podcast.
So this has been common in insurance, but I think we're going to start to see this happen for purchasing power and just, technology and different things. We're going to start seeing it more and more in other industries. I do see it in some industries already. What you've done, I guess, before I ask the question, is basically you've taken your agencies and merged them in with another agency. And so it's just this larger group, which adds a lot of purchase power, relationships with companies. And I'm kind of breaking it down outside of insurance terms because I want people that are in construction and automotive and other industries to understand that this can work in many different ways. But it's really all about the volume at the end of the day, and then letting you specialize on what it is you do.
Well, and there's also another term called arbitrage.
Okay.
Anybody can look at the Webster's dictionary, but it's capitalism 101. The big get bigger. Right. And what I mean by that is not in a harmful way, but your valuation from your EBITDA multiple can actually increase as you get bigger. So that's one thing that basically sold me on why would I want to sell and be part of this bigger group, because I'm doing just fine on my own.
Right.
It was at my valuation, at my size, let's just use a figure of 8 times EBITDA. I immediately become a partner in a much bigger firm. It now is worth 15 times EBITDA.
Right.
So I've doubled my equity just by doing one transaction.
Right.
Now, there's advantages and disadvantages to doing that or not doing that, but a common example I can think of in the M&A world is the Berkshire Hathaway model, right? Everybody knows Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who just recently passed away. They're doing that holding company model across all industries. Right. And they even go out and acquire, like you said, construction. There have been construction companies that have done that on their own, just in the construction vertical, just like we're doing in the insurance vertical. And then there's, Berkshire Hathaway then will acquire all of that plus all their subsidiaries.
Right. No, it's interesting how much more. I mean, I went through that process as well, and it frankly, from the EBITDA perspective, it was a great move. It was just almost instantaneously, it put me in a better position. So, there's a lot of good there. I think the idea is it's probably better to own a small part of something really big than a big part of something really small. You're going to withstand economics and the up and down turns of those as they come along when you're part of that bigger group. So
completely agree. The analogy I always use, Gary, is do you want to own 100% of a grape or 20% of a watermelon?
Right. Size is that's a great analogy.
Yeah. And it some people still like that 100% control. It didn't really bother me when I did it, because I knew that my net worth was going to continue to grow at a faster clip. And I enjoyed the people that were there, and I still had autonomy to run the subsidiary.
So you had started into the acquisition piece though ahead of this decision, right? Or this acquisition. So what got you in that mindset and that framework?
it was really that working on the business. I figured at some point, if I do my job and work in the business and sell everything I could sell, I was at some point going to plateau,
Right.
run out of steam, whatever you want to call it, right? Get kind of tired of the RV industry or whatever. And I knew that was going to happen at some point. So I looked out, what could I do? Well, I could use the cash I have to go out and buy my boats and do stupid things, or I could continue to grow and go out and buy other agencies to bolt on to my current agency. So I did that as you had suggested. Had a plan to, early on, just didn't have the money. But as I worked in the business and grew to a point where I had a little cash and was able to be further underwritten by a bank, got into that. And the first one was just challenging altogether. And it worked out at the end of the day, but you don't learn things until you do them. You could have all the best laid plans, and I did, and you get into it, and it just you learn by just going through it, I guess, is all I can. At some point, it's like the ladder on an escape building, right? 10-story building. And if there's a fire in the building, you jump on the escape ladder, and that ladder only goes down to maybe the second floor.
Right.
Right. At some point, you just have to jump.
Right.
And that's all I could associate it to. And is you can do all the research and be prepared for it. At some point, you just have to pull the trigger. And I think that's what people have a hard time doing. Is really intelligent people know exactly how to do things, but they just have a hard time pulling that trigger.
So you're bringing up a point, and a lot of that is decision making. That's really what we're talking about. So people will hesitate to make a decision, and there's all types of people. Some of them make them very quickly without enough information. Others know the answer and don't make it, which is making one, and they miss the opportunity. What are some benchmarks or guidelines that you use when you're making decisions that help you feel comfortable in that process?
If I can get 80% confident, that's my benchmark.
Okay.
If I'm 80% there, and it's not going to ruin my life, if I can get 80% there, and I'm confident that if this thing all falls apart, it's not going to ruin my life, that's my decision tree right there.
Okay. So where do you see it going? What are some of your aspirations? I mean, you've made all these steps in a pretty short period of time.
Yep. I guess my aspirations are just continue to grow by acquisition. I guess is at the moment the next 3 to 5 years is go out and identify and talk to other owners and to see if they have interest in joining our value proposition. I guess is where I'm at today. I don't have aspirations of getting in the political environment or joining another vertical. I think I'm pretty well set in the insurance space, right. Unless something drastic happens. My wife is in the medical world, and if she wants to start a hospital someday, right, that might change things. But at this moment, I'm doing a pretty good job of keeping the family afloat just in the insurance vertical.
Okay. When people are going through a transition, like your father went through phasing out, or you're going in and you're talking to a business owner and giving them some opportunities or options to look at, what are some questions that are important for people to ask themselves to know? Because what happened in your case, you weren't ready to retire and step out. Your father was. So the process was different between the two. When you're working with M&As, you're catching people at all stages here. And sometimes, I get involved with people that own a construction company. They may be 10 years in, but they're burned out because they've just worked in the business the whole time. Yeah. So what are some things that you would advise people to look at?
So on the buy side or sell side or both?
I would say on the sell side.
On the sell side. So for folks that are like burnt out or looking.
Or retiring out.
yeah, the on the sell side, the key question I would ask is, who am I going to be if I want to continue in the business? That's the first thing you have to decide. If you want to continue in that business, who am I going to be working with? Right?
Yes.
What is going to be my new normal? And you know, what is aside from that, from the human aspect of it, is what's going to be my financial position very shortly after, right? What is my valuation of my company? How much could I benefit by this transaction? Not only day one, but I think more importantly, the first question is, what is going to be my new normal after this event happens?
Right.
So I think that's really the first question, is if you just want to sell it and go sit on a beach, that's great for some. I'm not a beach sitter. I love going to the beach, but I'll be sitting on that darn beach for 3 days and then want to go start a new business.
Right.
As long as I'm healthy and can do things, I'm I found that most people that want to grow, they can only golf so many days and they can only sit on a
Right.
beach for so many days before they're like, man, I need to get and back and talk to the Garys of the world and figure out how I can do something different
Right.
here.
No, I understand
So
that. That seems that's just it. It's a hard concept for a lot of people that have really built something to feel like they're losing control of it, but that's not necessarily the case.
it's not, and most people probably feel like that. I had that major concern. I am losing control, but the second question I ask is, how much is it worth? So if I rationalize it as, if I completely lose control and I hate it, well, I've got a whole bunch of reasons now in my bank account to sit out my non-compete and to perhaps do something else after that.
Right.
That's how I justified it.
Right.
And so far, I'm having the best time of my life. I am so glad, so happy that I'm now able to shift more towards working on the business, doing what I love in the M&A, and still keeping my hands in the operation on what AI is going to mean for insurance and what all these things in the economy, interest rates, how does that impact everything?
Right.
So the seller really needs to figure out what they want their new normal to be.
Right. I think oftentimes when they get hung up on that piece of it, the one thing they need to consider is there's a reason they're to the point they're even talking to a person like yourself or some whatever industry they're in. And it's typically burnout and frustration.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we as humans tend to get really caught in routines. But if it's not working for us and it's burning us out, why not
Change it.
consider, do something different. Life's too short to be frustrated.
I totally agree, and I tell that to my staff all the time. Look, if you don't like it, just come talk to me. I'm a human.
Right.
This may not be for you. Find something
Right.
you're not frustrated with 60% of the time.
When you guys are looking at data acquisition and things like that, do you, what are some of the key factors you're looking at? Are you looking at what your demographic is in your area and you want 20, 30, 40% market share? How do you drive that when you're, and I want this from a perspective of a business owner so
Mm-hmm.
that others listening to this have an idea.
Yeah, we focus on, from an industry level, just cost of acquisition.
Okay.
So we want to get that to a certain point. We're willing to give up a lot on the front end to learn. So we do identify our what we feel our favorite and our best customer would be. And then we start using the tools, right? If Facebook has the tool, or somebody wants to sell us a list, or one of our partners groups, our networking groups, wants us to come to their event and gather some data amongst their club members or whatever. So we want to start with our targeted market, and for at least 3 or 4 months, we're just going to try it. We're just going to spend some money and see what happens. And if the cost of acquisition becomes too high, if we can feel like we can drive that down to a normal cost of acquisition, then we found something. And we can usually do that about half the time. So some data that we've paid for, it doesn't work out. It's just a coin flip. And some data is like, wow, we had no idea that was going to be really good stuff, and this group was gonna buy our products, and life is good. Let's keep adding more fuel to it. Does that help?
Yeah, but I wanted to. What the other question I wanted to ask? Yes, you answered my question as you're going through on acquisitions. If you're looking at a small business though, and you're going in, and I'm just talking about a small business owner, he's sitting in a town of 10,000 people. And when he's looking, if he's working on the business, I don't think many people do this.
Mm-hmm.
I often tell him, what's your radius? What are the number of options you have to sell your product in that radius? Which with insurance, it should be to everybody in it. If you're building
Right.
homes, it's going to be a smaller number and more
Yep.
focused. But is there anything in that regard that you look at, or how do you, because a lot of those, when they're in construction, they're in this, so it's unrealistic to go set a goal to accomplish something when you've got a demographic that is not going to give it to you.
It's finite. Yeah, it's contained. Aside from trying to figure out what your target market is, that's step one. What is your ideal customer? And go figure out, if out of 10,000 people, how many in that 10,000 is your ideal customer? If it's only one, then you got to go pay a personal visit to them, right? You're riding. But if it's 10%, you got 1,000 potential opportunities. Figure out where that group hangs out and what they do and how to communicate to them.
I just wanted to point that out. That's exactly what we're talking about, I guess, because I think so many small business owners working in the business don't even take time to
think about that
and do that piece of it. And it's extremely important, because if you're going in to buy an agency or any business, it's got to have a volume of certain degree. It's got to have potential of X, and it might be a retention to start with. But those are
right.
Those are the demographics.
You're right, Gary. I feel the same way in talking to other business owners. You ask them that question, they can't even tell you what their market is.
Right.
They're like, well, I don't know. I advertise and people call me.
Right.
Okay.
And I'm
busy. That's fantastic if you feed your family, but man, what are you missing?
Right. What's left on the table? Where are you underbidding your projects and your jobs, and how are you doing all that? Let's switch gears a little bit to some of the fun things that you've done. I noticed one other thing that you do is you're the co-founder, and I don't know if you're a part of it anymore, but Treetown Music Festival. So you must enjoy music. You grew up in the 80s enough to probably catch that good rush.
Yeah, 100%. So that business we sold and is no longer, but like anything in life, I had an opportunity arise, and I'm not just working on the business. I knew that there are other industries that I would potentially enjoy, just out of curiosity. And I had a good friend of mine that was in the music industry here locally or in Forest City, and came to me and said, I think we could do a large-scale music festival on Winnebago's campground. And they only use that once a year for a week, right? It sits dormant for 51 weeks a year. They're mowing it and keeping the electrical pedestals. And so he had said, Winnebago, by chance, could you just go ask them if they're interested in renting their grounds? So I committed to that. I said, yeah, I'll just ask the question. So I went and asked the question, and they said, oh my gosh, we have been considering renting our grounds because it sits idle for 51 weeks a year to make a little money on it. We don't want to be in that business. But from that point forward, I left that meeting. I'm like, I got to get involved in this, don't I? Like, so it was really just an opportunity to do something outside of insurance. Now, what happened, Gary, long term, it would end up being a failure. The first year we lost $1 million. So even though we had the best laid plans, and we announced Toby Keith, who is now deceased, and Brad Paisley, and looking at our market, we thought people are going to come from Minneapolis and Des Moines by the droves to camp, and this is we got everything sliced and diced here. Well, after losing $1 million the first year, and we got it down to about $500,000 the second year, we never were able to make any money, Gary. So it was to the co-founders, which I was included, having this event and then writing a check every year to keep it going. After about 4 years, it wasn't any longer any fun.
Right. It wasn't. So, it was charity work in the worst scenario.
Yeah, for sure. So did I learn? Holy cow, you bet. You never learn much from you do learn from your successes, but you learn a heck of a lot more from your failures.
I would agree.
And even though it was a financial failure, it still was not a failure to me personally because of what I learned on all of that. And to, maybe stay in my lane a little bit from what I know. It was just an industry I had almost no knowledge of. I had some partners that did, but we had some things happen that were just out of our control. And we were able to sell that, thankfully, to another larger outfit that knew how to drive that cost of entertainment down in their marketing. And we were just a tiny fish in a big pond, and we were just getting swallowed. So we saw the writing on the wall, and we were able to exit, and everything kind of got made whole finally. But it was a heck of a run, and I met a lot of cool entertainers, and my daughter got to sign things and do all that. But that was a growth experience for me personally.
I was going to say $1 million loss in the first year had to be a gut punch.
We were expecting to lose some, like any startup, right? Any business owner knows if you start something, you kind of can expect to lose maybe for the first couple of years. But by year 3 and 4, you better have some solid plans. And our best laid plans were continuing to get our teeth kicked in. And like I said, writing a check when the party's done to keep our bills paid wasn't very much fun after a while.
No, I can absolutely understand that. If you're going to give any advice to a young business owner, guy, somebody coming out of college or just coming out of high school, getting into trades, and they are in their 20s, early 30s, want to get into owning their own thing, what's a piece of advice you would give to that person?
Yeah, easy. I try to mentor a lot of kids, and including mine, and it's hang out. Your network needs to be smart people, and you're always going to be guilty by association. If you're associated with other business owners and your network of other folks that want to aspire to grow, well, by virtue of hanging out with them all the time, you're going to pick up a lot of things, and you're going to grow yourself. So associate with the right people, find a network, find somebody, find a group, and stop hanging out with people that drag you down.
Right.
I think it's that simple, at least to the younger group, is find a good crew.
Right. It makes all the difference in where we end up emulating our surroundings. So I appreciate
there was a book
advice.
I read. You're only as good as your top 5 people you hang out with. I think from a professional note, right? If you hang out with other business owners and you're constantly talking about balance sheets and things, well, you're naturally going to pick that stuff up. But if you're hanging out with people that are doing drugs and everything else, then that's what you're going to end up doing.
Right. No, and I think you and I can both look back in our own lives, I'm sure, without any doubt, and there will be certain people in there that have taught us a lot about business. I've got people that have taught me things to do, things not to do, and a lot of that was observation, but I admired them as a business owner, and I spent time with them. So it's very important on the company we keep. It seems cliche as an adult to tell a teenager that, but it's just, I've seen it in my own kids. You've seen it in yours. The company they keep is what drives them. And we see that in other people. So certainly I love to help, and it's nothing more enjoyable for me than to have some young person call me and just say, can I take you to breakfast? Because they just want that interaction and that conversation. So it's always good to do that and give back to that younger generation because they are our future. Any comments?
I totally agree.
Any comments you want to leave on this?
No, I can't think of anything, Gary. I just appreciate being on. I have no idea who your listeners are, and the only comment I would add is I am an open book. If anybody wants to call me and just chit chat about things, I am open to that. I'm always interested in meeting new people and learning. And if I can give one nugget, I'd be happy to. And I always pick stuff up too by just talking to other people.
Right.
So I guess that'd be my only comment is, just Google my name. You'll find my office number and inquire. And I'd be happy to have a discussion with any of your listeners.
And they can find you out on LinkedIn under Courtney Wooge. They can find you on Facebook and any of those things. Well, I just want to thank you, Courtney, for taking the time. I know you started young and were aggressive in business. That's why I have you on here. Clearly, you took a different approach than some, and you were aggressive in decision making. We've heard today how some were, great decisions and others were great ones to learn from. So,
no doubt.
Thank you for joining us on Mindset Growth Podcast.
Yeah, good luck.